The smell hit her before the sound did. Something chemical and sharp, like burning metal mixed with ozone, rolling across the dark pasture in a thick wave. Nora Bellamy dropped the feed bucket she had been carrying back from the chicken coop and stood frozen in the middle of her yard, staring toward the far edge of her property where an orange glow pulsed behind the tree line. She was not a brave woman by nature. 34 years old, living alone on 12 acres of coastal farmland, spending her days tending animals and her nights reading paperback novels with the windows open. She had moved out here after leaving the veterinary field clinic in town, tired of people and their noise. The land was quiet. The land made sense. Tonight, the land was on fire. She grabbed her flashlight and the emergency med kit she kept by the back door, an old habit from her field nurse days, and started walking. The grass was wet with dew and soaked through her boots within seconds. The glow ahead grew brighter as she crossed the pasture, and by the time she reached the fence line, she could see the trench. Something had torn through the earth at an angle, ripping a scar across 50 meters of ground before coming to rest against the base of a rocky hill. The object at the center of the trench was not a meteorite. It was too smooth, too structured, with curved edges and panels that reflected the firelight in ways that rock never would. Pieces of it had broken apart on impact and lay scattered across the torn soil like shrapnel. Nora climbed the fence and approached slowly. The heat was intense near the wreckage, but fading. She circled the object, keeping her flashlight trained on it, and found an opening on the far side where the hull had cracked apart like an eggshell. Inside, something was breathing. She leaned closer, and the flashlight beam fell on a figure slumped against the interior wall. Tall, gray-skinned, with long limbs folded at unnatural angles. Its chest was torn open in 3 places, and a dark violet liquid pooled beneath it, spreading slowly across the tilted floor. The face was narrow and angular, with high ridges above the eyes and a thin mouth that opened and closed with each shallow breath. It was alive. Barely. Nora's hands were shaking. Every rational part of her brain told her to back away, to go inside, to call someone. But her eyes kept returning to the wounds. 3 deep lacerations across the chest, one of which was pulsing with each heartbeat. The bleeding was severe. Whatever this thing was, it had minutes, not hours. She climbed inside. The creature's eyes snapped open the moment she touched its arm. They were wide and dark, almost entirely pupil, and filled with something she recognized immediately. Terror. Not anger, not aggression. Pure fear. It tried to pull away from her, dragging itself backward, but its body failed, and it collapsed with a wet, rattling sound. Nora held up both hands and spoke softly. The same voice she used with injured animals on the table, low and steady and calm. She told it she was not going to hurt it. She told it to stay still. She told it she was going to help. T did not understand her words. She knew that, but it understood her tone because it stopped struggling and lay there, watching her with those enormous dark eyes. She opened the med kit and went to work. The lacerations were deep but surprisingly clean, as if made by something very sharp rather than blunt impact. The violet blood was thinner than human blood, but clotted in a similar way when exposed to air. She packed the worst wound with gauze and applied pressure, holding it for a full 10 minutes until the bleeding slowed. The second wound she closed with butterfly strips, pulling the gray skin together as carefully as she could. The third was shallow enough to leave. She worked by flashlight for over an hour. The creature watched her the entire time, never blinking, never making a sound beyond its labored breathing. At one point, when she was stitching the deepest cut with a curved suture needle from her kit, its hand moved and rested against her forearm. Not grabbing, just touching, as if confirming she was real. By the time she finished, the sky was turning gray along the eastern horizon. Nora sat back on her heels, covered in violet blood from her elbows to her fingertips, and looked at the creature she had just spent the night saving. It was still watching her. She could not leave it in the wreckage. The hull was unstable and the temperature was dropping. She made 3 trips to the house and back, bringing blankets, water, and a tarp. She dragged the tarp to the barn, laid out the blankets, and then spent another 20 minutes half carrying, half dragging the creature across the pasture. It was heavier than it looked, dense in ways that did not match its thin frame. She laid it down on the blankets in the barn and covered it with 2 more. Its breathing was steadier now. Not good, but stable. She sat beside it on an overturned bucket and watched its chest rise and fall. She had no idea what it was. She had no idea where it had come from, or why it was here, or what any of this meant. She had no plan, no authority to call, no framework for what was happening. But it had been dying, and she knew how to stop dying. That was enough. The sun came up over the coastal hills, and light crept through the barn slats. Nora Bellamy sat beside an alien from another world and listened to it breathe, and she did not once consider walking away. 2 days passed before the creature spoke its first word. Nora had settled into a rhythm by then. Every few hours she would check the bandages, clean the wounds with boiled water, and offer food. Most of what she brought was rejected. Bread, rice, cooked eggs, all pushed aside with a weak hand and a slight shake of the head. But broth worked. She boiled chicken bones with salt and strained the liquid into a bowl, and the creature drank it slowly, holding the bowl with both hands like it had not eaten in a long time. Fruit worked too. Sliced pears and soft bananas. It ate them carefully, chewing with small, deliberate movements, watching her the entire time as if waiting for a trick that on the second evening. While Nora was changing the bandage on the deepest wound, the creature touched the side of its own head, just behind the left ear. There was a small bump there, something embedded under the skin. It pressed the bump twice and winced, and then a faint hum came from somewhere inside its skull. It opened its mouth and said a word that was not English, not any language Nora had ever heard. Then it paused, pressed the bump again, and tried once more. "Name," it said. The word was rough and broken, like it was being assembled from pieces. "My name, Dalen." Nora stared at him. She pointed to herself. "Nora." He repeated it slowly. "Nora." Then he touched his own chest. "Dalen." "Oren." Over the next several hours, the device behind his ear seemed to calibrate itself. His words came faster, though they were still fragmented. He explained in short, painful sentences that the device was a translator, standard equipment for his kind, but it had been damaged in the crash. It was rebuilding its language model from her speech, learning English in real time by listening to her. The following morning, he could form full sentences, though his grammar was uneven and he sometimes used words in the wrong order. He told her he was not a soldier. He said this several times, as if it mattered to him that she understood. He was a record keeper, a librarian of sorts, though the word he used was closer to memory holder. His people, the Orin, were a civilization of scholars and artists who had existed for thousands of years across a cluster of worlds far from Earth. They had been conquered, The Vethari Dominion, he said. A military empire that expanded by absorbing smaller civilizations. Not just their territory and resources, but their identity. The Dominion did not simply defeat its enemies. It erased them. It burned their libraries, silenced their languages, destroyed their art, and scattered their populations until nothing remained but obedient labor. The Orin had resisted for 11 years before the final collapse. Dalen had been chosen to carry something off-world before the last city fell. He did not say what it was. When Nora asked, he went quiet and looked away. Instead, he asked her a question. Why did you help me? Nora was sitting on the barn floor with her back against a hay bale, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. She looked at him and shrugged. You were dying. She said. He studied her face with those wide, dark eyes. You did not know what I was. No. You did not know if I was dangerous. You were bleeding out. That made you not dangerous. On most worlds, Dalen said carefully, finding an unknown species in a crash vessel would result in one of two responses: killing it or reporting it to military authority. You did neither. Nora took a sip of her cold tea. I'm a nurse. I fix things that are broken. That is what I do. He was quiet for a long time after that. The barn was still except for the sound of wind pushing against the walls and the distant crash of waves from the coastline below the property. Nora could see him thinking, processing something behind those alien eyes. Your species, he said at last. Humans. You are not in the Galactic Registry. The what? The cataloged list of known civilizations. The Dominion maintains it. Earth is listed as a pre-contact world. Undeveloped. Irrelevant. Nora raised an eyebrow. Irrelevant. That is the classification. She snorted softly and shook her head. Well, this irrelevant woman just saved your life with chicken broth and a sewing needle. So maybe the classification needs updating. Dalen did not smile. She was not sure his face could form one, but something shifted in his expression. A softening. A crack in the wall of fear and exhaustion he had been hiding behind since she found him. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something she did not fully understand until much later. Perhaps it does. That night, Nora brought extra blankets to the barn and slept on the floor beside him. Not because she was afraid he would leave, but because she was afraid of what might come looking for him while he could not run. She kept the flashlight within reach and the barn door locked from the inside. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright above the coastline, and somewhere among them, something was already searching. Dalen woke her before dawn with a hand on her shoulder, gripping tight enough to bruise. Nora sat up fast, blinking in the dark. His face was close to hers, and she could see the fear in it, raw and immediate, worse than the night she had found him bleeding in the wreckage. They are here, he whispered. She did not ask who. She did not need to. The device behind his ear was humming faintly, and his eyes kept darting toward the barn wall as if he could see through it. How many? She asked. 3. A scout team. They landed 2 kilometers north, near the ridge. He was already trying to stand, his legs shaking under him. The wounds on his chest had closed, but were far from healed, and every movement made him wince. You need to let me go. If they find me here, they will kill you. The Vethari do not leave witnesses. Nora stood and put both hands on his shoulders, pushing him back down. You cannot walk half a kilometer in your condition, let alone run from soldiers. Sit down. You do not understand what they are. I understand that you will bleed out in a field if you try to leave right now. Sit down. Saturday Nora moved quickly. Beneath the barn floor, accessible through a heavy wooden hatch covered by hay, was an old root cellar her grandfather had built decades ago. It was deep, dry, and lined with stone. She cleared the hatch, helped Dalen down the narrow steps, and settled him in the far corner with blankets and water. The soil here is dense clay and rock, she told him. If their scanners are anything like the ones in science fiction movies, this should block the signal. This is not fiction, Dalen said. No, she agreed. But the physics of dense, earth-blocking electromagnetic waves is real enough. Stay quiet. Do not move. She closed the hatch, spread hay over it, and walked outside. The morning air was cold and damp. Fog had rolled in from the coast and hung low across the pasture, turning everything gray and shapeless. Nora walked to the front of her house, sat down on the porch steps, and waited. They came 20 minutes later. Three figures emerged from the fog line, walking in formation. They were tall, taller than Dalen, and encased in dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their helmets were angular and featureless except for a narrow visor slit that glowed faint red. Each one carried a weapon mounted on the forearm, sleek and integrated into the armor itself. The one in front stopped 10 meters from the porch. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that was sharp and pale, with deep-set amber eyes and a mouth that seemed designed for commands rather than conversation. Human female, he said. His English was perfect, clipped, and precise, delivered through a translator far more advanced than Dalen's damaged one. I am Commander Reth of the Vethari Dominion Enforcement Division. We are tracking a fugitive whose vessel crashed in this region. Have you seen anything unusual in the past 3 days? Nora looked at him from the porch steps. She was still in her sleep clothes, a flannel shirt and worn jeans, with her hair uncombed and her boots unlaced. She looked exactly like what she was, a tired farm woman who had been woken too early. The crash, she said, nodding toward the far pasture. I saw it 3 nights ago. Thought it was a meteorite. I called the local council office and reported it. They said they would send someone out next week. Commander Reth studied her. His amber eyes moved across her face with mechanical precision, looking for tells. You approached the crash site? He asked. I walked out to look at it. There was a trench and some debris. Looked like rock to me. I did not touch anything. Did you see any biological material at the site? Any sign of a living occupant? No. One of the soldiers behind Reth raised a device and swept it slowly across the property. Nora watched it move, keeping her face neutral. The soldier spoke to Reth in a language she could not understand. Reth listened, then turned back to her. We are detecting trace biological residue consistent with Oran physiology. The signal is faint and dispersed, but present. Nora shrugged. If something was alive in that crash, it did not survive long enough for me to find it. There was blood on the rocks, violet colored. I assumed it was some kind of mineral deposit from the impact. You are welcome to go look at the wreckage yourself. It was a gamble, a deliberate one. She was betting that the trace residue at the crash site would be stronger than anything near the barn, and that directing their attention there would pull them away from the house. Reth stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his soldiers and gave an order. 2 of them moved toward the far pasture. The third stayed behind, watching Nora with that red visor glow. Reth stepped closer. If you are hiding the fugitive, the consequences will extend beyond you. Your settlement, your species, your entire world could be designated as hostile territory. Nora met his eyes and did not blink. I'm a farmer. I raise chickens and grow vegetables. I do not know anything about fugitives or dominions or whatever this is. I just want to go back to sleep. He held her gaze for 5 seconds. Then he turned and followed his soldiers toward the crash site. Nora sat on the porch until all three figures disappeared into the fog. Then she went inside, locked every door and window, and sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She did not go to the barn until nightfall, when she was sure they were gone. When she opened the hatch, Dalen looked up at her from the darkness and said one word. Why? Nora reached down and helped him up. Because they do not get to decide who I help. He showed her on the fourth night. They were sitting in the barn under the glow of a single lantern, the kind Nora used during power outages. Dalen had eaten half a bowl of broth and 2 slices of pear, which was more than usual, but his color was worse. The gray of his skin had taken on a dull, ashen tone, and the ridges above his eyes had darkened to almost black. He was getting weaker, not stronger, and they both knew it. He reached into the folds of the garment he had been wearing when she found him. It was torn and stiff with dried violet blood, but there was an inner pocket near the chest, sealed shut with a clasp that responded only to his touch. He pressed his thumb against it, and the pocket opened. He pulled out a crystal. It was small, no bigger than a hen's egg, and shaped like a teardrop. Its surface was smooth and slightly translucent, with a faint internal glow that shifted between pale gold and soft violet, like a heartbeat made of light. When Dalen held it in his palm, the glow brightened and Nora could hear it. A hum, low and warm, vibrating at a frequency she felt in her chest more than her ears. This is what they want, Dalen said quietly. This is why they are hunting me. Nora leaned closer. The crystal's light played across her face, and for a brief moment, she thought she heard something inside it. Not words, but the ghost of a melody, distant and layered, like a song being sung by 1,000 voices at once. What is it? She asked. Dalen held it with both hands, the way someone would hold a newborn. It is called an ethin. In your language, the closest word would be memory, but that is not enough. It is the complete recorded history of my people. Every story we ever told, every song we ever sang, every name we ever carried. Our language, our science, our art, our genetic memory, all of it, encoded in the crystalline lattice of this stone. Nora stared at it. Everything, everything. 11,000 years of civilization. From the first Orin who looked up at the stars and asked what they were, to the last child born before the Dominion came. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. The Vethari do not simply conquer. They erase. They burn every library, every archive, every monument. They silence every language and replace it with their own. Within 2 generations, the conquered species forgets it ever existed. That is the strategy. That is how they hold their empire. Not through military force alone, but through the destruction of memory. He looked at her. When we knew the war was lost, the Council chose one keeper to carry the ethin beyond Dominion space, to hide it somewhere it could survive. I was that keeper. Nora sat back slowly. The weight of what she was looking at settled over her like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders. This was not a piece of technology. It was not a weapon or a bargaining chip. It was a civilization, a whole civilization, sitting in the palm of a dying alien's hands, glowing softly in the light of a kerosene lantern in a barn on the edge of nowhere. "Dalen," she said carefully, "what do you want me to do?" He held the crystal out to her. She did not take it. Not yet. She looked at his face and saw something there she had not seen before. Not fear, not pain. "Certainly, I want you to keep it," he said. "I'm nobody. I'm a nurse on a farm. I do not have a spaceship or a bunker or an army. I do not even have a working internet connection half the time." "That is why," Dalen said, "Earth is not in the Dominion Registry. Your planet is classified as pre-contact, undeveloped, irrelevant. They have no outposts here, no surveillance networks, no reason to return once they believe I am dead. Your world is invisible to them, and invisible is safe. But I do not know how to use it. I do not know how to read it or protect it or any of that. You do not need to read it. You need to keep it. That is all. Keep it hidden, keep it safe, and one day, when the Orin find their way back, they will come looking for it. It will call to them. The Ethan has a resonance that our people can feel across vast distances. It may take years. It may take generations. But they will come." Nora looked down at the crystal in his outstretched hand. It was warm and alive with that pulsing glow, and the humming had grown louder, as if it knew it was being offered. "And if they do not come," she asked, "then it still survives? And survival is enough. As long as the Ethan exists, the Orn exist. Every song, every name, every child who ever laughed in the sunlight of our homeworld, all of it alive inside this stone." She reached out and took it. The moment it touched her skin, the glow flared bright and then settled into a steady, warm pulse that matched her own heartbeat. The humming softened to something almost musical, almost familiar, like a lullaby she had heard once as a child but could not quite remember. Dalen watched her hold it, and for the first time since she had found him, the tension in his body eased. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. He looked at her the way someone looks at a harbor after a long and terrible voyage. "Thank you," he said. Nora closed her fingers around the crystal and held it against her chest. "I will keep it safe," she said. "I promise." Outside, the wind carried the sound of the ocean up the hillside, and the stars turned slowly overhead. And somewhere among them, an empire that erased worlds did not yet know that the thing it wanted most was resting in the hands of a woman it had already dismissed as irrelevant. Nora was pulling the truck around to the back of the barn when she saw the lights point 3 points of white fire descending through the low clouds above the northern ridge, moving in tight formation. Not aircraft, not helicopters. These moved with a precision and silence that belonged to nothing built on Earth. They dropped below the cloud line and disappeared behind the tree cover, but not before Nora counted them and understood what they meant. The scouts had come back, and they had brought reinforcements. She ran to the barn. Dalen was already awake, sitting upright with the blanket pulled off and his hand pressed against the device behind his ear. His face was grim. "A full strike team," he said. 6 soldiers. Heavy scanning equipment. They will find me this time. The root cellar will not be enough." Nora did not argue. She had already been thinking about this since the first visit. The root cellar had worked because the scout team's portable scanner was weak. A full team with dedicated equipment would sweep every square meter of the property, above ground and below. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Not well. Can you sit in a truck for 20 minutes? He hesitated, then nodded. She helped him to the vehicle, a battered pickup with rust along the wheel wells and a cracked windshield she had never bothered to fix. She laid blankets across the passenger seat and eased him into it. The crystal was in her jacket pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief. She could feel its warmth against her ribs. Nora drove without headlights. She knew this land in the dark, every dip and ridge and gate. The truck bounced along the unpaved track that led down to the coast, past the old stone walls and through the gap in the fence where the sheep used to graze before she sold the flock. The ocean appeared below them, black and restless under a clouded sky. She parked the truck behind a rock outcropping and helped Dalen down to the shoreline. The tide was low, which was what she had been counting on. At low tide, the entrance to the sea cave was exposed, a narrow opening at the base of the cliff that led into a chamber carved by centuries of water. She had played in it as a child. She knew its dimensions, its blind turns, its pockets of dry ground above the waterline. In here, she said, guiding him through the opening. The floor was wet rock and slippery, and Dalen's feet struggled for grip, but she held him steady and brought him to the back of the cave where the ground rose and leveled out into a dry shelf. She settled him against the wall, wrapped him in blankets, and left him water and a last of the pear slices she had packed. The tide will cover this entrance in about 4 hours, she said. When it does, no one can get in or out until it drops again. Stay here. Do not move. Where are you going? Back. If they come to the farm, and I am not there, they will know something is wrong. I need to be home. Dalen grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. They will not be as patient this time. I know. If they suspect you are lying, they will hurt you. I know that too. He released her wrist slowly. You are a strange species. Nora almost smiled. You are not the first person to tell me that. She drove back to the farm by a different route, parked the truck in its usual spot, and went inside to wash her hands and change her jacket. The crystal went into a wooden box on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, tucked behind a stack of old photo albums. Then she went to the porch and sat down, the same way she had done before, and waited. They came at first light. Commander Reth walked at the front of the formation this time, flanked by 5 soldiers carrying equipment she did not recognize. He stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at her. We have completed a secondary analysis of the crash debris, he said. The biological material recovered is consistent with a living Orin, not a fatality. The fugitives survived the impact. Nora shrugged. Then it wandered off and died in the hills. There are cliffs and ravines all over this coastline. Things fall and are never found. Reth stepped closer. He reached out and took her arm, gripping just above the elbow. His fingers were cold and impossibly strong. He leaned in until his face was close to hers. I have pacified 46 worlds, he said quietly. I have broken species far older and far more powerful than yours. Do not insult me with lies. Nora's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it, but she did not pull away. She looked directly into his amber eyes and spoke with a voice that did not shake. If you hurt me, people will come looking. Not soldiers, neighbors, friends, a town full of people who know my name and know where I live. And when they find out what happened, they will not stop. They will call more people, and those people will call more. That is how humans work. We do not forget our own. We do not stop looking, and we do not forgive. Reth held her gaze. She could see him calculating, weighing the risk of a confrontation on an unregistered world against the value of one fugitive. He released her arm. The fugitive is logged as deceased, he said flatly. Impact fatality. Case closed. He turned and walked back to his soldiers. Within minutes, they were gone, lifting into the gray sky and disappearing above the clouds. Nora stood on the porch and watched them go. Then she sat down on the steps, pressed her palms against her knees, and let herself shake. She found him at low tide the next morning, curled on the stone shelf, exactly where she had left him. He was worse. She could see it the moment she knelt beside him. The gray skin had gone almost white, and the veins beneath it were visible now. Thin dark lines running across his temples and down his neck like cracks in old porcelain. His breathing was shallow and uneven, and when he opened his eyes, it took him several seconds to focus on her face. "They are gone," Norris said softly. "The commander logged you as dead. They left orbit last night." Dalen let out a long, slow breath. Something in him released, a tension he had been carrying since long before the crash. Maybe since the day the last Orange City fell. His shoulders dropped, and his body seemed to settle deeper into the blankets, as if he had been holding himself upright through sheer will and no longer needed to. "Good," he whispered. Nora helped him back to the truck, then to the barn. The drive was slow and careful, but every bump in the road made him wince. By the time she laid him down on the blankets inside, his breathing was worse than it had been on the first night. The wounds she had stitched were not bleeding, but something inside him was failing. Something she could not reach with gauze or thread or broth. She sat beside him and held a cup of water to his lips. He drank a little, then turned his head away. "Your medicine cannot help me," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact, delivered gently, like he was trying to spare her the weight of it. "My organs are shutting down. The crash damaged things that your tools cannot see. I knew this before the first day ended." Nora set the cup down. Her hands were steady, but her eyes burned. "Then why did you not tell me?" "Because you would have tried harder. And you had already done more than anyone in my entire life has ever done for me." She looked away. The lantern light flickered across the barn walls and through long shadows behind the hay bales. Outside, the first birds were beginning to call, and the sky was turning from black to deep blue along the eastern horizon. Dalen reached into the blanket beside him and found the crystal. She had brought it back from the house that morning, knowing somehow that he would want it close. He held it in both hands for a moment, and the glow inside it brightened, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his fading heartbeat. Then he held it out to her. "Take it," he said. Nora took it. The crystal settled into her palm like it belonged there, warm and humming. "On my world," Dalen said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the act of entrusting someone with the Ethan is called the Rail North. It means the giving of all memory. It is the highest honor one being can give to another. It means that you believe the person receiving it has a soul strong enough to carry an entire civilization." His dark eyes found hers and held them. "I have traveled across 12 star systems since the fall. I have hidden on stations and cargo ships and dead moons. I have met hundreds of beings from dozens of species. Some were kind, some were indifferent, most were afraid." He paused to breathe, "but none of them did what you did. None of them saw a stranger dying in the dark and chose to crawl inside the wreckage and save him without knowing what he was or what it would cost." Nora's throat was tight. She did not trust herself to speak. "That is why humans frighten me," Dalen said. "Not because you are strong or clever or dangerous. Because you are compassionate without condition. A single human, alone and afraid, with no weapons and no armor, will still choose to help. That is a kind of power the Dominion has never encountered. They do not have a strategy for it. They cannot erase it because it is not stored in libraries or archives. It lives inside you, every single one of you. He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. You asked me once what would happen if my people never came for the Ethan, he said. I told you that survival was enough. But I was wrong. It is more than survival. It is proof. Proof that somewhere in this galaxy, a species exists that will protect something precious simply because it matters. Not for reward, not for power, just because it is the right thing to do. His hand found hers and rested on top of it, his long gray fingers covering her smaller ones. That is what the Dominion will never understand, and that is why they will lose. His breathing slowed further. Each inhale came with a longer pause before the next. Nora held his hand and did not move. She stayed with him through the last hour, through the final breaths that came further and further apart, until the barn was quiet and the only sound was the wind coming up from the sea. Dalen died as the sun broke over the coastal hills, filling the barn with gold light. Nora buried him that afternoon beneath the old oak tree on the hill behind the house, the one that looked out over the ocean. She dug the grave herself, by hand, and placed flat stones over the top because it felt right. She did not say any words. She did not know his prayers or his customs, and anything she could say felt too small for what he was. The crystal went into a wooden box on the shelf in her bedroom. She could hear it humming at night, soft and low, like a sleeping thing dreaming of home. She never told anyone. There was no one to tell, and nothing that words could carry. But sometimes, late in the evening, she would take the box down and hold the crystal in her hands and feel it pulse against her skin, warm and alive with 11,000 years of songs and stories and names. And somewhere in a quiet farmhouse on an uncharted world, dismissed as irrelevant by an empire that erased civilizations, the last memory of an entire people burned on, steady and safe, held in the hands of one woman who had simply refused to look away.